The phone call, that satisfying career of Ethan Cole, lasted exactly 3 minutes. 9 years of midnight emergencies, abandoned weekends, and a body that had forgotten what rest felt like, all of it reduced to a text message while his 9-year-old son built a sandcastle 10 feet away. But what Monica Vance did not know, what nobody at Nexelon Corp knew, was that firing their CTO on a Thursday morning in Outer Banks would set off a chain of consequences that would bring her empire to its knees. And it would start with the simplest thing imaginable: a boy asking his father to help dig a moat. The message glowed on his screen: terminated, effective immediately. HR will contact you regarding benefits and final paycheck. Letters on glass symbols without meaning at first, the way a sentence in a foreign language might wash over you before your brain catches up. Then comprehension arrived like a slow tide. 9 years compressed into 3 lines of text, the digital equivalent of tossing someone's belongings into a cardboard box and leaving it by the curb. Then heat. Not anger exactly, not yet, but something closer to the flush you feel when you realize you have been played, that the game was rigged from the start, and you were too busy winning rounds to notice the house always takes the pot. Behind him, Liam crouched in wet sand with the focus of a surgeon. His tongue stuck out slightly, the way it always did when concentration took hold, small hands packing grains around the base of a tower that leaned optimistically to the left. The boy wore swim trunks and a faded Captain America t-shirt that was a size too small because Ethan kept forgetting to buy new clothes. That was the kind of father he had become, the kind who could architect a server infrastructure spanning 6 data centers, but could not remember his own son had outgrown last summer's wardrobe. The North Carolina sun pressed down on Ethan's shoulders with the indifference of a universe that did not care about employment status or stock options or the fact that a 41-year-old man was standing barefoot on a beach, watching his entire professional identity dissolve in real time. Seagulls screamed overhead. Waves crashed in their old rhythm. Somewhere down the shoreline, a family laughed over a dropped popsicle. The world continued oblivious, as worlds do. His phone buzzed again. Monica Vance. A follow-up text: clear your personal items by Friday. Security will escort you if necessary. Security. As if he were a threat. As if the man who had kept their systems breathing through every crisis for nearly a decade was now someone to be guarded against. A small voice cut through the haze, and it carried more weight than any server alert ever had. Dad, you okay? Ethan turned. Liam stood a few feet away, plastic bucket in one hand, sand caked to his knees, brown eyes studying his father with a calm that should not have belonged to a 9-year-old. The boy was not panicking. He was not even particularly worried. He had the expression of a child who had learned through years of quiet observation that his father periodically received information that made his face go strange, and that this information always won. It always pulled Dad away. The phone always came first. Ethan looked at the device in his hand, looked at his son, the phone, Liam. The phone with its chain of demands and threats and the entire architecture of a life that had just declared him disposable. And Liam with sand on his cheek and hope hiding behind caution, waiting for the inevitable, waiting for Dad to say, "Sorry, buddy." Something came up. He powered off the phone. The action took 2 seconds. It felt like cutting a rope that had been tied around his wrist for the better part of a decade. For the first time since Claire died, Ethan Cole had no connection to Nexelon Corp. No server alerts, no emergency channels, no digital leash pulling him back to a building in Charlotte where people were at this very moment discovering that the man they had taken for granted was no longer available to save them. "I'm good, bud. Want me to help with the moat?" Liam blinked as if the question did not compute. Then a smile started, tentative, the careful kind that children learn when they have been disappointed enough times to know that good things sometimes get revoked. "Yeah, that'd be cool." They knelt together in the sand, and Ethan felt the unfamiliar luxury of having nowhere else to be. 48 hours earlier, Ethan had been a different man standing in a different world. The kitchen of his suburban house operated with the sterile efficiency of a server room. Everything clean, everything in its place, everything functioning, and none of it alive. The counters gleamed, the sink was empty. On the refrigerator, a photograph of Liam at 5 years old smiled out from beneath a magnet. But Liam was 9 now, and no one had updated the picture. The calendar on the wall still showed last month. The kitchen was a space that had been used but never inhabited, maintained but never loved. And if you looked closely, you could see the difference between a home where someone was living and a house where someone was surviving. 6 in the morning, coffee maker gurgling. Ethan stood in front of it, checking email on his phone, because even the 45 seconds required to brew a cup felt like wasted time if his hands were not also doing something productive. 3 new alerts from overnight. A client in Houston complaining about latency. Craig Dunlap asking a question about the Morrison presentation that proved once again that Craig had not read the documentation Ethan had spent 2 weekends preparing. Liam shuffled in wearing Spider-Man pajamas and hair that defied every known law of physics. The boy moved through the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been handling his own mornings for a long time. He knew where the bowls were. He knew how to pour cereal without spilling. He knew not to ask for much. Morning, Dad. Morning, Bud. Cereal. Sure. The exchange was scripted. They had performed this exact dance 1,000 times. Two people sharing space but not quite connecting like radio signals on adjacent frequencies that could hear each other's static but never quite tuned in. Ethan poured Cheerios while his eyes stayed on the phone. Liam ate in silence, glancing occasionally at his father's distracted face with an expression that looked, if you were paying attention, like someone carefully measuring the distance between hope and resignation. Mrs. Calloway says we're supposed to bring a parent to career day next month. Ethan's thumb kept scrolling. Sounds great. Will you come? I'll try, Bud. Let me check my calendar. You said that about the science fair. That made Ethan look up. Liam was not accusing. He was stating fact the way a weatherman states that it will rain, not with bitterness, just with the flat certainty of someone who has observed the pattern long enough to predict the outcome. The science fair had come. Dad had not. The school play before that. The parent-teacher conference before that. Each missed event was a small deposit into an account that Liam had learned to keep balanced by simply expecting less. Ethan opened his mouth to explain to promise to say the things fathers say when they know they are failing but have not yet figured out how to stop. But his phone erupted with the particular vibration pattern he had assigned to critical infrastructure alerts. Server cluster at the Dallas data center cascading failures across 3 nodes. All hands. I'm sorry, Bud. I know. Liam's voice was soft, practiced. It's okay. But it was not okay. Ethan saw it in the way the boy carried his cereal bowl to the sink, with the careful movements of someone who had decided at 9 years old that independence was safer than needing things. Liam rinsed the bowl, dried it, put it away, grabbed his backpack from the hook by the door, checked that his lunch, which he had packed himself the night before, was inside. Then he walked to the front door and pulled on his shoes, and the whole sequence was so smooth, so self-sufficient, that it broke something in Ethan's chest that he did not have time to examine because the Dallas cluster was burning and 300 engineers were waiting for him to tell them what to do. At the door, Liam paused, did not turn around, just said quiet as weather, "It's always a lot." 4 words, not a complaint, not an accusation, just the summary of a 9-year-old's entire understanding of how the world worked, how fathers operated, how love was structured, how the phone always won. It's always a lot, as if abundance were the natural state of demand and scarcity, the natural state of presence, and there was nothing to be done about either. Ethan carried those 4 words through the entire day, through the crisis calls and the emergency patches and the video conferences with panicking clients, through Monica's clipped directives delivered from her glass corner office on the 32nd floor, through Craig Dunlap's passive-aggressive emails that once again deferred responsibility to Ethan because Craig had never bothered to learn the systems he was supposed to manage. Through all of it, like a stone in his shoe that he could not shake loose, it's always a lot. 23 floors above the open-plan engineering floor where Ethan's team worked, Monica Vance occupied a corner office that looked exactly the way power was supposed to look. Glass walls, steel furniture, the kind of calculated minimalism that wealthy people called elegant and everyone else called cold. 2 monitors on her desk displayed real-time dashboards, a single cactus on the windowsill, the only living thing in the room besides Monica herself, and some days it was hard to tell which one was less approachable. She sat behind her desk in a charcoal suit that had been tailored to project authority the way a uniform projects rank. Her nails were painted a dark red that she renewed every Sunday evening, the one ritual she maintained from a life that had otherwise been stripped down to its professional components. No personal photographs were visible anywhere in the office except one, a framed picture of a girl maybe 12 years old laughing at the camera with the unguarded joy that children have before the world teaches them to guard it. The frame was face down on the desk, and it had been face down for so long that a faint rectangle of dust had formed around its outline, the ghost of a photograph that someone had decided not to look at. Monica Vance had built Nexelon from a mid-tier software consultancy into a 3,000-employee technology firm through a combination of strategic brilliance, relentless fundraising, and the willingness to demand from others exactly what she demanded from herself, which was everything. She had done this in an industry that still treated women executives as anomalies, where she had needed to be twice as sharp and half as emotional to earn a seat that mediocre men inherited by default. The armor she wore was not affectation. It was survival equipment forged in the specific fire of being told again and again that she was too aggressive or too cold or too focused, as if the qualities that made male CEOs visionary made female CEOs difficult. But armor worn long enough becomes skin, and Monica had worn hers so long that she could no longer tell where the protection ended and the person began. That Tuesday evening, when Ethan walked into her office at 6 o'clock and told her he was taking a vacation, she did not look up for 10 seconds. This was deliberate, not rudeness strategy. The 10-second pause was a tool she used to establish hierarchy. My time matters more than your time. You wait for me. Ethan stood through it. He had played this game for years. But something in his posture was different tonight, a straightness in his spine that suggested he had already made his decision and was informing her rather than asking. What is it, Ethan? I have 4 weeks of accrued PTO. I'm taking one. Starting tomorrow. HR approved it. She looked up then, and her surprise was genuine because in all his time at Nexelon, Ethan Cole had never once requested time off. He was the constant, the fixed point around which crises orbited and resolved. He was the man who answered at 2 in the morning and stayed until the problem was solved and never not once suggested that this arrangement was anything other than perfectly acceptable. In the middle of the SEC audit, everything is documented. Craig has the Morrison presentation. Kyle knows the security protocols. I'll be back before the infrastructure review. HR approves paperwork, Ethan. I approve people. I haven't taken a single day off since I started here, Monica. Her voice dropped to the register she reserved for moments when she wanted someone to feel the temperature change the way a room gets colder when someone opens a window in February. We don't operate on entitlement here. We operate on commitment. It's approved, it's legal, I'm going. The smile Monica gave him did not reach her eyes. It was the smile of someone cataloging a transgression for future reference, filing it in the drawer where she kept leverage. Fine, take your vacation. But don't expect us to put the entire company on hold just because you suddenly remembered you have a son. Suddenly. The word landed like a blade laid flat against skin, not cutting, but letting you know it could. Years of having no family life, and Monica called it suddenly, as if fatherhood were a hobby Ethan had picked up on a whim, rather than a responsibility he had been failing at since the day his wife collapsed on a kitchen floor and left him holding a baby he did not know how to raise. Ethan left before he could say something that would cost him more than a week's vacation. His heart hammered with the specific cocktail of triumph and dread that comes from standing up to someone who holds your livelihood in their hands. The door closed behind him. Monica sat motionless for a moment, then her hand moved to the face-down photograph on her desk. She lifted it. Zoe, 12 years old in the picture, laughing. Zoe was 16 now. She lived with her father in a house across town, and the last text she had sent Monica 3 days ago read, "Mom, you don't need to come to my play. I know you're busy." The same tone, the same practiced acceptance, the same careful lowering of expectations that Liam performed every morning over cereal. 2 children in 2 different houses learning the same lesson from 2 different parents. Don't expect, don't hope, don't need. Monica set the photograph face down again, opened her laptop, pulled up the SEC audit timeline. When the pain came, and it came briefly like a cramp, she did what she always did. She worked. When guilt surfaced, she worked harder. Work was controllable. Work had metrics. Work did not look at you with your ex-husband's disappointed eyes and ask why you chose a board meeting over a school play. She was in every way that mattered Ethan Cole's mirror. The same wound, the same coping mechanism, the same slow abandonment of the people who needed them most. The only difference was direction Ethan was trying clumsily to turn around. Monica was accelerating forward because turning around would mean admitting that a decade and a half had been a mistake, and that was a calculation she was not yet prepared to run. 20 hours later, Ethan and Liam were driving south on Highway 64 in a Honda Civic that had seen better decades. The odometer read just under 160,000 miles. The air conditioning worked intermittently. Classic rock played low from speakers that rattled on the bass notes. None of it mattered, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Ethan was driving towards something, instead of away from something, and the difference was physical. A looseness in his shoulders, a depth to his breathing, an awareness of the landscape scrolling past that he normally would not have registered because normally his mind was 3 server rooms and 2 time zones ahead of his body. Liam fell asleep somewhere around the state line, head pressed against the window mouth, slightly open, one hand still clutching the book he had been reading. Ethan glanced over and felt the particular ache of realizing how little he knew about his own son's daily life. Who was Liam's best friend? What was the book about? What did the boy dream about when he was not being careful, when sleep stripped away the caution and left only the child underneath? The beach rental was nothing special and everything necessary. A weathered cottage 3 blocks from the water, its floors creaking a specific complaint, with every step its furniture a mismatched collection of pieces that had been donated rather than chosen. The kitchen smelled of salt air and old wood. The bathroom faucet dripped with a rhythm that sounded almost musical. The smaller bedroom had a porthole window and wallpaper printed with anchors and ship wheels, and Liam claimed it instantly, dropping his bag on the bed and pressing his face to the round glass like a captain surveying his domain. "Can we go to the beach right now?" Ethan checked his watch. Habit always habit. The reflexive glance at time as if time were a resource being depleted rather than a river being traveled. Then he stopped himself, reached for the watch clasp, took it off, set it in the nightstand drawer, and closed the drawer. "Yeah, let's go." They walked to the water as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed exaggerated, too vivid, like a postcard that had been color-corrected beyond reality. But it was real. All of it was real, and the problem was not that the sky was too beautiful, but that Ethan had spent so many years looking at screens that he had forgotten what unfiltered light looked like. Liam ran ahead. His laughter carried back on the salt-scented wind, and it was the sound of a boy being allowed for the first time in memory to simply be a boy. Not the prematurely responsible 9-year-old who packed his own lunches and knew which of Dad's facial expressions meant another canceled plan. Just a kid running toward waves with his shoes in his hand. They spent 2 hours in a bubble that felt stolen from someone else's life, built a sandcastle with lopsided towers, chased waves and pretended to be outraged when the ocean won, hunted for shells that Liam insisted were the good kind, though his criteria for classification remained mysterious. And Ethan remembered dimly, distantly, that he had once known how to do this, how to play, how to be silly, how to exist inside a moment instead of managing it. For dinner, they got pizza from a place Liam spotted from the car. "It has cartoon characters on the sign, Dad. It has to be good." The logic was ironclad. They ate on the cottage's small porch while the sky darkened and fireflies began their ancient dance across the yard, and Liam talked more in those 3 hours than he had in the previous 3 months. About school, about his friend Marcus, who was teaching him to skateboard, about the book series he was reading, something about a kid who could talk to sea creatures, about a teacher named Mrs. Calloway who actually listened when you talked, about everything and nothing, the ordinary overflow of a child's interior world that Ethan had been too distracted to access for years. Ethan listened, not the half-listening of a parent whose eyes keep drifting to a phone screen, but real listening, the kind that involves your whole body leaning forward and your questions coming from genuine curiosity rather than polite obligation. And what he heard was this: his son had an entire life that Ethan knew almost nothing about. An entire universe of friendships and fears and fascinations that had been developing in the gaps between emergencies, growing in the soil of his father's absence, the way certain plants grow in shadow alive, but reaching always toward a light that never quite arrives. When bedtime came, Ethan sat on the edge of Liam's bed in the small room with the porthole window. Moonlight painted silver across the boy's features, making him look younger, more vulnerable, closer to the baby Ethan remembered holding in a hospital room, while a doctor explained in careful clinical language that Claire was not coming home. "Dad, yeah, bud, this is nice." 2 words, the simplest possible assessment, and yet they landed with the force of something much larger because nice should not have been remarkable. A normal evening with a present father should not have qualified as special. It should have been baseline ordinary, the default setting of childhood. The fact that Liam said it as though he were discovering something new told Ethan everything he needed to know about the years he had wasted. It is nice. A pause, then very quietly, as if testing whether the words would hold weight or collapse. Can we do this more, even when we go home? I'm going to try, Liam. I really am. You promise even just one day a month, that's all. One day a month. The request was so modest it hurt, as if a full day of fatherly presence per month represented the absolute ceiling of what this child dared to hope for. As if he had calculated with the unconscious math of a kid who had been disappointed too many times that keeping expectations low was the only way to survive the gap between promise and reality. Ethan's throat tightened. Every weekend, for real, and at least one dinner during the week, just us. Liam's eyes went wide. Every weekend, every weekend. The smile that spread across the boy's face was worth more than any quarterly bonus, any title change, any performance review that had ever been written about Ethan Cole's professional excellence. It was sunrise in miniature slow golden, transforming everything it touched. That would be, yeah, that's awesome. Then it's a promise. Okay, a yawn. Night, Dad. Night, bud. Love you. Love you too. Ethan stayed until Liam's breathing deepened into sleep. Watch the boy's face relax into the defenselessness of dreams. Claire had died when Liam was 8 months old. Aneurysm. Sudden. Catastrophic. One moment she was laughing at their son's attempts to crawl, her whole face bright with the particular joy that belongs to watching your child discover locomotion. The next moment she was on the floor. And then she was gone. Just gone. Erased from the world while Ethan was at the office deploying a server update for a client deadline that he could not even remember the details of anymore. He had spent the years since running. Not physically, Ethan Cole was not the running type. He was the staying type, the staying so long it became hiding type. He had buried himself in Nexalon's infrastructure the way a man buries himself in a foxhole, not because the foxhole is comfortable, but because the alternative is standing in the open where the artillery can find you. Work was controllable. Code either functioned or it did not. Server failures had solutions. Unlike grief, which had no patch. Unlike loss, which could not be debugged. Unlike the specific annihilating guilt of knowing that your wife died while you were fixing someone else's problems, and that no amount of logical understanding that an aneurysm gives no warning could silence the irrational howl of a heart that insisted if you had been there. If you had called 911 3 minutes sooner, if you had chosen her that morning instead of choosing work. So he had chosen work every morning since, and work had rewarded him. He had risen from senior systems engineer to CTO not through political maneuvering or Ivy League credentials, but through the raw accumulation of skill and reliability. Community college education, self-taught code, 17 industry certifications earned on weeknights and weekends while Liam slept in the next room. Ethan had built Nexalon's entire infrastructure from the ground up, and he had built his career the same way, one brick at a time, each one laid with the desperate energy of a man trying to construct something solid enough to stand on, because the ground underneath him had collapsed, and he did not know how to stop falling. But while he was building, Liam had been growing, becoming a person, developing thoughts and fears, and an entire interior world that Ethan barely knew, because you cannot know someone you are not present for, and presence was the one thing Ethan had never managed to provide. He rose carefully from the bed, pulled the covers up to Liam's chin, and stood in the doorway for a long moment. "Sleep well, bud," he whispered. "We've got a whole day of castle building tomorrow." Then he closed the door softly and went to his own room, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not dream of server failures and emergency alerts and the constant mechanical ping of crisis. He dreamed of sandcastles and his son's laughter carried on ocean wind, and the dreams felt like something he had been owed for a very long time. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of perfect beach weather that exists specifically to make you believe, however briefly, that the universe is capable of mercy. Cloudless sky, gentle breeze, temperature hovering in the mid-70s. Ethan woke to find Liam already dressed and vibrating with the particular energy that only 9-year-olds possess before the weight of the world teaches them to conserve it. "Can we go to the beach now? I want to build an even bigger castle. Maybe with a bridge this time." They were on the sand by 8, Liam surveying potential construction sites with the gravity of an architect selecting a building lot. Ethan sipped coffee from a travel mug and watched, feeling the unfamiliar luxury of having no morning stand-up meeting, No urgent email requiring immediate response. No crisis alert pulling his attention in 17 directions at once. Around 10, with the castle taking shape, Liam had designed an elaborate complex with multiple towers and a drawbridge made from a stick and some string. Ethan's phone rang. He had turned it back on that morning, not out of compulsion, but out of the practical recognition that a single father could not be entirely unreachable. The name on the screen sent ice water through his veins. Monica Vance. He considered letting it go to voicemail, but the same Pavlovian conditioning that years of emergency response had built into his nervous system made his thumb swipe before his brain could overrule it. Monica's voice was a blade wrapped in silk. The SEC audit is falling apart. Craig doesn't understand your documentation. Kyle can't access half the security protocols. We need you back here immediately. The old programming kicked in. The familiar surge of adrenaline that came with being needed, with being the only person who could solve the problem, with being indispensable. For years, that surge had been his drug. The thing that made him feel valuable, necessary, real. Without it, he was just a man with a dead wife and a son he did not know, standing in a life he had neglected to the point of structural failure. Monica, I just got here yesterday. And the SEC doesn't care about your travel schedule. Craig can barely explain what a firewall does, let alone walk auditors through our security architecture. Ethan looked at Liam. The boy was carefully placing shelves along the castle wall, completely absorbed, finally experiencing something that looked like a normal childhood memory. No. Excuse me? I said no. I'm not coming back early. Monica's voice dropped 20 degrees. Nexelon is not a charity. We pay you a six-figure salary to be reliable. If you can't be, we need to reconsider your position. I've been reliable for years. I've never said no. Not once, one vacation. If the company can't survive 5 days without me, that's a design flaw in the organization, not a failure on my part. His hands were shaking when he hung up. He stared at the phone, waiting for the regret to hit, for the panic to arrive. But the panic did not come. What came instead was a strange, unfamiliar lightness, as if he had set down a bag he had been carrying so long he had forgotten it had weight. The phone rang again. Monica. Declined. Again. Declined. Texts arrived in rapid succession. You're making a career-ending mistake. Call me back immediately. Last chance, Ethan. 3 minutes after the last text, the final message arrived. Effective immediately. Your employment with Nexelon Corp is terminated. HR will contact you regarding benefits and final paycheck. Liam had stopped building. He was watching his father with those careful eyes, the ones that had learned to read adult distress the way other children read picture books, fluently, silently, and far earlier than anyone should have to. Dad, who was that? Just work stuff, old work stuff now. Are they being mean to you? Yeah, bud, some people are saying not very nice things. That's not fair. You were always fixing their problems. Ethan knelt in the sand beside his son, eye level, close enough to see the freckles that had appeared across Liam's nose this summer, close enough to smell the sunscreen and salt water, and the particular sweetness of childhood that no cologne or perfume would ever replicate. Hey, how about after this we go get ice cream and then maybe find a kite to fly? Liam's eyes went wide, and in their wideness, Ethan saw the full measure of what he had been denying his son. Not ice cream and kites, but spontaneity. The permission to do something for no reason other than that it sounded fun. The radical act of a parent choosing presence over productivity in the middle of a weekday. Really, in the middle of the day. Why not? Sandy's Sweet Shop sat on the corner of Main Street, run by a white-haired woman in her 60s, who greeted them as if they were returning family rather than strangers who had walked in off the street. She boxed up Liam's chocolate chip cookie dough and Ethan's coffee with the brisk tenderness of someone who had been feeding people for decades and understood that ice cream was occasionally medicine. First vacation here, she asked. First real vacation anywhere in a while, Ethan admitted. Well, make sure your dad actually relaxes, okay? She pointed at Liam. We get too many folks through here who spend the whole time on their phones doing work. Liam looked up at Ethan with an expression that contained multitudes. He's been pretty good so far. They found the kite shop 2 doors down. A patient employee helped them select a rainbow-colored stunt kite that the man assured them was practically foolproof, a claim that the next hour would test rigorously. On the beach, the first attempt ended with the kite nosediving into the sand. So did the second, and the third through 7th. But Liam was undeterred. He ran and adjusted and tried again with a focused determination that reminded Ethan of Claire, the same set of the jaw, the same refusal to accept that a thing could not be done, The same quiet stubbornness that had once led Claire to repaint their living room 3 times in a single weekend because the color was not exactly what she had envisioned. On the 8th try, the kite caught a gust and soared. Liam's whoop of triumph was the purest sound Ethan had ever heard. The boy ran along the beach with the kite dancing above him, a rainbow against the blue, and he was laughing, not the polite laugh of a child performing happiness for an audience, but the real thing, uncontrolled and radiant, and full of the specific magic that exists only when a kid forgets even for a moment to be careful. Ethan followed more slowly, watching his son finally be what he was supposed to be. Not the prematurely responsible child who forged permission slips and made his own lunches. Just a kid, flying a kite on a Thursday afternoon. They stayed on the beach until the sun started down. Liam's arms were tired. Ethan took over the kite while his son sat in the sand, knees drawn up, watching the colors deepen with the unguarded wonder of a child who has not yet learned that sunsets happen every day and are therefore not worth noticing. Dad, when was the last time we did something like this? Ethan thought about it. Really thought, searching through years of work, emergencies, and missed dinners and weekends spent in the home office while Liam watched television alone in the next room. Too long ago. Liam nodded, still watching the sunset. I like this better. Better than what? Better than when you're home but not really there. When you're on your laptop at dinner. When you check your phone during movies. Not an accusation, an observation, delivered with the flat, factual tone of someone reporting the weather. And somehow that made it worse than any tantrum could have been because it meant the boy had accepted this as normal, had built his expectations around a father who was physically present and emotionally absent, and had decided that this was simply how things worked. I'm sorry, Liam. It's okay. The automatic response, fast practiced. I know your work is important. Ethan put his hand on his son's shoulder. You're more important. Liam looked up at him, searching his face for something, sincerity maybe, or the specific texture of a promise that will actually be kept rather than quietly abandoned the next time a server crashes. Really, really, you are the most important thing in my life. I'm sorry I made you think anything else came first. Then Liam leaned into his father's side, did not say anything, just leaned. The full weight of a 9-year-old boy, which was not much in pounds, but was everything in trust, settling against Ethan's arm, with the careful, deliberate pressure of someone who had decided maybe to try hoping again. They sat like that until the stars began to appear, and the sound of the ocean filled the space where words were not needed. That night, after Liam was asleep, Ethan sat in the small living room and allowed himself finally to confront what had happened. He opened his phone. 43 missed calls, 67 text messages, 29 emails. He scrolled through them with the detached fascination of a man watching his own house burn from across the street. Monica's final email arrived at 9:14. Subject line, final notice. An offer to rescind the termination if he returned by morning, conditional on his understanding that this kind of behavior cannot be repeated and that future vacation requests will need to be strategically timed. Come back, accept that you have no right to a life outside this company, and be grateful. Ethan opened a new email, typed his response. Monica, thank you for the offer, but I won't be returning. The termination can stand. I spent too many years making Nexelon my priority. It's time I made my son mine instead. Ethan. He pressed send before the old programming could pull his finger back. In Charlotte, in a glass office on the 32nd floor, Monica Vance read Ethan's email at 10:47. Her expression did not change. Her hand reached for the coffee that had gone cold hours ago. On her phone, a text from Zoe waited unanswered. Mom, are you coming to my play Friday? She looked at the text, looked at the SEC audit report glowing red on her second monitor. The company was hemorrhaging. The audit was collapsing. The man who had held it all together was on a beach building sandcastles with his son. She typed back to Zoe, I'll try. The same words. The same hollow promise. Ethan's words to Liam over cereal recycled now, through a different parent carrying the same weight of good intentions that would almost certainly be broken by morning. Outside her window, Charlotte glittered with the false confidence of a city that did not know yet that one of its mid-rise towers was about to lose its foundation. Inside her office, a photograph lay face down on a desk, and the empire was beginning to crack, and she could not bring herself to look at the picture of the daughter she had lost to the same ambition that was now losing her everything else. Friday morning brought clouds rolling in from the Atlantic, turning the sky a moody gray that matched the arithmetic Ethan had been running since 5:30. He sat at the cottage's small kitchen table with a pen and a legal pad, not a spreadsheet, not an app, but paper because the physical act of writing numbers made them harder to ignore. Savings $52,000. Mortgage on the house in Charlotte purchased in a good school district, so Liam could attend a decent elementary, $2,200 a month. Cobra health insurance because losing your job in America meant losing the right to affordable medical care, $1,400 a month. Groceries, utilities, car insurance, gas, the accumulated friction of simply being alive in the 21st century, $2,800 a month. He added the column twice, hoping the second pass would produce a different total, but math was not in the business of mercy. $6,400 a month outbound against a reservoir that would be dry in 8 months if nothing went wrong, and 5 if anything did. The pen hovered over the pad. 5 months. That was the distance between where Ethan sat and the edge of a cliff he could not see the bottom of. 5 months before, he would need to consider selling the house, pulling Liam out of his school, dismantling the last structure of stability he had managed to provide, while dismantling everything else. The irony was surgical. He had spent years sacrificing his relationship with his son on the altar of financial security, and now both the relationship and the security were gone. He picked up his phone and opened LinkedIn, updated his profile with the clinical precision of a man describing his own autopsy available for opportunities, sent messages to 3 recruiters he had worked with over the years. The first response came within 20 minutes. It was not what he expected. Ethan heard about this Nexalon situation. Honestly, the word on the street isn't great. Vance has been telling people you walked out during a federal audit. For a CTO, that's a serious flag, my advice. Lay low for a few months. Let the noise die down. I'll reach out when the climate changes. He read it twice. The second reading included the understanding that this was not one recruiter's opinion. This was the market's opinion, shaped in real time by a woman who understood that the most effective way to punish someone for leaving was to ensure they had nowhere else to go. Monica was not merely firing him. She was salting the earth behind him, spreading a version of events that transformed his legal-approved vacation into a dereliction of duties so severe that no respectable company would touch him. The fear that arrived was specific, granular, the kind that comes with line items. If he could not find work within 5 months, the house would go. If the house went, Liam would change schools. Marcus gone. Mrs. Calloway gone. Every anchor point in the boy's life pulled up at once. Liam appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing pajamas, hair executing its morning rebellion. "You're doing the thing again." Ethan looked up. "What thing?" Liam did not answer with words. Instead, the boy's face shifted, jaw tightening, shoulders climbing toward his ears, one hand reaching unconsciously for an invisible phone. A perfect, devastating pantomime of Ethan under stress performed with the accuracy of someone who had been studying the original for years. Then Liam's face relaxed back to neutral and the impression was over, and the silence that followed contained the entire history of a child learning to read his father the way a sailor reads weather. "Yeah," Ethan admitted, "I'm a little worried." Liam considered this with the seriousness of a field commander evaluating options. "Let's go to the beach. You think better near the water." The prescription was simple. It was also exactly right. They walked to the shore through air that smelled of rain and salt. The beach was quieter than the day before. A few joggers, an old man sweeping a metal detector over the tide line, a pair of seagulls arguing over a French fry. Liam began building immediately, his hands moving with the confidence of someone who had found in the architecture of sand a competence that the rest of his life did not always provide. His phone buzzed. Jay Barrett. Jay was 38, a systems engineer at Nexalon who had worked alongside Ethan for 6 years and was the closest thing Ethan had to a real friend inside the company. Their friendship operated the way male friendships often do in professional settings, expressed through competence, rather than confession, built on mutual respect and the unspoken understanding that if either of them ever truly needed the other, the phone would be answered on the first ring. Jay's voice was tight with barely controlled outrage. "Ethan, man, what the hell happened?" Short version, I took a vacation. Monica called me back. I refused. She fired me. Via text message. "Yeah, I heard. The whole company heard. Monica sent an all-staff this morning saying you chose to pursue opportunities outside Nexalon. But Craig is telling everyone you got fired, and he's not exactly keeping it classy." "What's Craig saying?" Jay paused, and the pause was the kind that people deploy when the next sentence is going to leave a mark. He replied to the all-staff. Pretty sure he didn't realize it was going to the whole distribution list. His exact words, good riddance. Guy was impossible to work with. Maybe now we can actually modernize instead of doing everything Ethan's way. The words arrived with a specific kind of violence, not the hot violence of an insult shouted in anger, but the cold violence of betrayal delivered in writing. Craig Dunlap, who had called Ethan at 11 on a Saturday night 6 months ago because he had accidentally deleted a production database and needed someone to restore it before Monday. Craig, who had taken credit for the Morrison account restructuring that Ethan had designed. Craig, who could not navigate a command line without a cheat sheet declaring to 3,000 employees that the man who had kept the entire infrastructure standing was impossible to work with. Most of the senior engineers are defending you, Jay continued, but Craig's crew is piling on. It's turned into this whole thread about your communication style. Ethan watched Liam carefully construct a wall tongue out, completely unaware of the conversation happening 10 feet away. It's not my circus anymore, Jay. The audit is genuinely falling apart. Craig tried to walk the SEC team through your security protocols this morning and had a meltdown. Kyle can handle the basics, but the deep architecture, nobody else understands it. I documented everything. Documentation is only useful if the people reading it bothered to learn the systems while you were still around to teach them. They didn't. That's a leadership failure, not a documentation failure. After hanging up, Ethan sat looking at the ocean. The clouds had begun to thin. Weak sunlight pressed through the gray and the water caught it in fragments. Jay's information confirmed what Ethan had suspected. Nexelon was not merely inconvenienced by his absence. It was structurally compromised, the way a building is compromised, when you remove the load-bearing wall and discover that the architect never planned for the wall to be removable. But that was their problem now. Their design flaw. Their failure to invest in redundancy and training in the basic organizational principle that no single person should be a single point of failure. In Charlotte, Monica sat in a conference room watching Craig Dunlap attempt to explain Ethan's security architecture to two SE2 auditors whose expressions had progressed from professional skepticism to undisguised concern. Craig had notes. The notes were not helping. He referred to the firewall configuration as the wall thingy at one point, and the younger auditor's pen actually stopped moving. Monica's face betrayed nothing, but inside the arithmetic was running. If the audit failed, compliance rating drops. If compliance drops, stock drops. If stock drops, the board asks questions. If the board asks questions, the answers lead back to a single decision made by a single person on a Thursday morning, and that person was Monica. After the auditors left, she closed the conference room door. Sat alone. She had fired Ethan Cole because he said no. Not because the company couldn't function without him. It could have if she had spent years building the kind of team that any competent leader would have built. She fired him because his no was an act of defiance that her authority could not absorb. Because choosing his son meant that the choice was available that a person could actually make it. And if a person could make it, then Monica's own failure to make it was not inevitable, but voluntary. Her phone buzzed. Zoe. Tonight was the school play. She opened her calendar. 7 o'clock board prep call. She chose the call. At 9 that evening, Zoe texted her father 6 words: Mom didn't come. Like always. They ate lunch at the Shark Bite Grill, a tourist trap of the highest order, with plastic fish nailed to every available surface and servers wearing shark tooth necklaces. Liam loved it unreservedly. He ordered the reef shark, which was a cheeseburger with fries, and studied the plastic hammerhead mounted above their booth with the intensity of a museum patron encountering a masterpiece. Between bites, the questions started. The practical ones that a 9-year-old asks when he understands at some cellular level that the ground has shifted. When we go home, are you going to get a new job? Yeah, bud, I'll need to. What if it's the same as before? What if they want you to work all the time too? Then I'll find a different one or set better boundaries. Liam's expression was the specific blend of love and skepticism that only a child can produce. You always say you'll set boundaries, but then something happens and you can't. You're right. I've been bad at that, but this time is different. How? Because this time I actually got fired for trying to keep a boundary. And being here with you is worth more than any job. But what about money? Mrs. Calloway says jobs are important because that's how you pay for things. Jobs are important, but they're not more important than people. That evening, with the clouds fully cleared and a tentative sunset warming the western sky, they made spaghetti together in the cottage kitchen. Liam stirred the sauce with the same focused intensity he brought to sandcastles, tongue slightly out, one eye on the pot, and one on his father, as if memorizing the moment in case it did not repeat. Halfway through dinner, Liam set down his fork. "Do you miss Mom?" The question arrived without preamble, the way important questions do when they come from children. No build-up, no context, just the raw inquiry launched into the air like a bird released from a hand. Every day. I don't really remember her, just like feelings, I guess. Like knowing someone was there but not actual pictures in my head. That's okay. You were really little. Something opened in Ethan's chest. Not the usual grief, which was a closing, a contraction, but an opening, a space that had been locked for years finding its hinges again. He had not talked about Claire, not really. He had kept her sealed away partly to protect Liam from pain, and partly mostly to protect himself, because talking about Claire meant feeling the full weight of a loss he had been deadlifting for nearly a decade. "You want to hear how we met?" Liam's eyes went wide. "Yeah." She grabbed my laptop bag at a coffee shop. Thought it was hers. Called me 20 minutes later, totally embarrassed, and the first thing she said was, "Does your laptop have anything interesting? Mine's just Photoshop files and bad watercolors." Liam grinned. She said bad. She was always honest about her own stuff. Tough on herself, easy on everyone else. "What about your first date?" "The restaurant gave us food poisoning, both of us. We spent half the night in the emergency room and your mom was laughing so hard the nurses thought she was delirious. She told me if we could survive food poisoning on a first date, we could survive anything. And she proposed to me, not the other way around. We were hiking in the Blue Ridge and she pretended to find a ring half buried in the dirt. Picked it up totally casual, like she'd stumbled on a quarter. Then she looked at me and said, 'Well, someone clearly wanted you to have this. Seems rude not to say yes.'" Liam laughed, a real laugh, unguarded. And Ethan realized something that rearranged the furniture of his grief. Claire did not have to be a wound. She could be a story. She could be a presence in their lives, instead of an absence, a person Liam could know through the telling, even if he could never know her through the living. "You know what you got from her? That laugh. Exact same laugh. And the way you concentrate when you're building, that's pure Mom." "What about from you?" "The stubbornness, definitely. And apparently my talent for annoying people by being technically right about everything. Jay told me you're a pain when you're in correction mode." "Jay is a wise man." "When did he tell you that?" "At the company picnic last year. He was nice. Showed me how to skip rocks." The phone rang. Philip Alderman, Nexelon Board of Directors. Ethan excused himself, stepping onto the cottage porch where the last light was fading. Alderman was direct. "We've become aware of the circumstances of your departure. The board is disturbed. Ms. Vance's handling was inappropriate. We'd like to offer reinstatement VP of Infrastructure. Significant salary increase. Equity, guaranteed schedule flexibility." The numbers ran automatically. VP salary, equity, health insurance. The $52,000 in savings suddenly no longer bleeding out. The house safe. Liam's school safe. Everything resolved in a single phone call. He looked through the cottage window. Liam was back at the table reading legs, swinging under the chair, spaghetti sauce still on his chin. The boy's face wore the carefully neutral mask a child puts on when he suspects a phone call is about to change the plans. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Alderman, but I'm going to decline." "May I ask why?" "Because whether it's Monica giving the orders or someone else, the culture doesn't change. I'd still be the single point of failure. I'd still be choosing between my son's school events and emergency meetings. And the first time I enforce those boundaries, you're promising we'd be right back here. I can assure you." Monica assured me I could take vacation. That assurance lasted about 36 hours. "I understand. The offer remains open for 30 days. Thank you. And Mr. Alderman, the audit problems go deeper than my absence. You might want to look at how the company ended up dependent on one person. That's the real vulnerability." After hanging up, Ethan stood on the porch and breathed. Salt air, pine, the distant crash of waves. He had just turned down a rescue, a real one, with real money and the immediate solution to every practical problem, shredding his nervous system. And he had turned it down because he had finally developed the ability to see past the immediate crisis to the structural problem underneath the company would not change. The demands would return, the boundaries would erode, and Liam would learn once again that promises were fragile things. He went back inside. Liam looked up from his book. The carefully neutral expression was still in place. "Was that your old company?" "Yeah." "Did they want you back?" "Yeah." "Are you going?" "Nope." Liam's shoulders dropped. Not a dramatic collapse, just a small settling, The way a structure settles when a load is removed, quiet, almost invisible and profound. Oh, okay. The boy returned to his book, but the tension that had been holding his spine straight was gone. Saturday arrived with the kind of radiant, rain-washed clarity that makes you understand why people believe in fresh starts. Every surface gleamed. The sky stretched overhead in a blue so clean it looked new. They ate breakfast at Captain Jack's for the second time. Dottie greeted them like family, led them to the same booth without asking, and had Ethan's coffee poured before he sat down. Saturday crew Liam pancakes again. If something works, you don't change it. Can't argue with that philosophy. After breakfast, they walked to the Saturday farmers market near the marina. Liam stopped at a honey stand run by an old man named Earl whose face looked like it had been carved from driftwood. Ethan bought a jar of wildflower honey and fell into conversation. First time visiting. First real vacation in a very long time. What line? Systems engineering, computers, servers, infrastructure. The stuff nobody thinks about until it breaks. Earl laughed, a dry sound like sand shifting. Like plumbing. You should talk to Frank. Comes by every Saturday, buys my honey. Does something with computers, too. 10 minutes later, a man approached who immediately confirmed Earl's description. Mid-60s, silver hair, khakis, and a linen shirt that had earned its softness honestly. Sandals. He looked like someone's grandfather on his way to a beach cookout, not like someone whose net worth required scientific notation. Earl the usual. 2 jars, right? One for the office, one for the granddaughter who puts it on everything, including last I heard pizza. She's 6. She puts everything on everything. The man turned to Ethan and Liam with a smile that started in his eyes before reaching his mouth. Morning. Earl giving you the hard sell on the wildflower. They shook hands. Frank Hargrove, nice to meet you both. The conversation that followed was easy and unforced. Frank asked what Ethan did. Ethan described it: legacy system modernization, infrastructure, architecture, the work of taking things that were built wrong and making them function right. The digital equivalent of surgery on a moving patient, Ethan offered. Except the patient fights you the whole time, and everyone has opinions about your scalpel technique. Something shifted in the conversation, then a deepening. Frank asked about the size of environment Ethan had managed. His eyebrows rose slightly with the appreciation of a professional recognizing another professional's weight class. You said was, past tense. I got fired for taking this vacation. First one in years. My boss called me on day 2 demanding I return for an emergency audit. I refused. 3 minutes later, I was unemployed. Frank's expression did not change. No judgment, no pity, just thoughtful stillness. Let me guess, you documented everything, built processes, trained people, and when you left, none of it held. How did you know? Because I've seen it 1,000 times. Companies build themselves around singular points of failure, then act surprised when those points of failure have the audacity to be human beings with lives outside the server room. Frank bought his honey, then turned back. I'd enjoy continuing this conversation. There's a restaurant up on the bluff sea cliff, excellent seafood. Would you and Liam join me for dinner tonight? We'd like that. 7 o'clock. He shook Liam's hand too, then noticed the boy eyeing a carved wooden dolphin at a nearby booth, reached into his pocket and handed Earl a 5. The dolphin's on me. Every marine biologist needs his first specimen. Liam's eyes went wide. How did you know I want to be a marine biologist? Lucky guess. After Frank left, Ethan stood holding a jar of honey and a business card that read simply, Frank Hargrove, and a phone number. No title, no company logo. He typed the name into a search engine, looked at the results, looked again. Frank Hargrove, founder and CEO of Skyforge Solutions, one of the largest cloud infrastructure providers in the United States. Dad, why do you look like that? Like what? Like when you find a bug in the code and it's actually a really big deal. They spent 4 hours at the Ocean Discovery Aquarium. Liam pressed his face against every tank, narrated the behavior of jellyfish with professorial authority, and reached into the touch pool to pet a stingray with a gentleness that made the teenage volunteers smile. Feel how smooth, Liam urged, and Ethan reached in and ran his fingers along the ray's wing and felt something he had not expected: wonder. The simple, untranslatable wonder of touching a living thing that had been swimming in oceans since before humans existed. Mom would have loved this, he said, and the words came out before the filter could catch them. She liked rays. She was terrified of sharks, but she loved rays. Said they looked like they were flying underwater. We went to the Georgia Aquarium when she was pregnant with you, and she stood in front of the ray exhibit for almost an hour. The memory surfaced with unexpected clarity, Claire. 7 months along, one hand on her belly and one on the glass. She had turned to Ethan and said, "Someday we'll bring the baby here and I'll teach him that the most beautiful things in the ocean are the ones that aren't trying to be scary." He told Liam this, and the boy absorbed it the way he absorbed everything about his mother, carefully, reverently filing it away in the archive he was building from stories, because the original was not available for consultation. At 3:30, Liam spotted the sign for Driftwood Books and pulled Ethan inside with the non-negotiable urgency that children reserve for bookstores and pet shops. The shop was small, warm, and smelled of old paper and fresh coffee. A woman stood on a step stool adjusting a shelf that listed slightly to the left, a hammer in one hand and a level balanced on her wrist. Mid-40s brown hair pulled back, reading glasses perched on top of her head, and a smudge of ink on her forearm. Her daughter, 12, matching jaw, sat behind the counter, reading a thick paperback with the focused absorption of someone who would not notice a fire alarm until the sprinklers hit her page. Liam vanished into the children's section. Ethan browsed, drifted toward a section marked "Starting Over." Stopped. Read the spines without touching them the way a person looks at a door they are not sure they are ready to walk through. The woman noticed. She stepped down, crossed to where he stood, and slid a novel from a different shelf entirely. She placed it on the shelf edge nearest him with the casual precision of someone who matched books to people the way a pharmacist matches prescriptions to symptoms. That one's better. Actual story, not somebody telling you how to feel about your own life. How did you know I needed this? Because you stood in front of that shelf for 2 minutes without taking anything. People who want to read self-help grab and go. People who need something deeper stare at the shelf and can't figure out why none of the titles fit. She extended her hand. "Helen Marsh, I own this accidental enterprise." "Ethan Cole, that's my son back there, hopefully not reorganizing your fiction section." She smiled, warm without being performative. "First time in town, first time on vacation in a very long time. I opened this place 3 years ago, after my husband died. I was a literature teacher before that, but the classroom felt wrong afterward. So I opened a bookstore because I needed a place to be that wasn't home and wasn't the past." The honesty was unexpected and precise, and it landed in a place Ethan had not known was exposed. "I'm sorry about your husband. 3 years now. And here's the thing nobody tells you about grief. The hardest part isn't the pain. The hardest part is when the pain starts to fade, because then you feel guilty for feeling less. Like healing is betrayal." The sentence went through Ethan like current through copper. Years he had been running from exactly this, the fear that if he stopped working long enough to feel the grief would arrive and transform into something worse, acceptance. And acceptance meant the wound was closing. And a closing wound meant forgetting. And forgetting Claire was the one betrayal he had sworn never to commit. Helen watched his face the way she probably watched her shelves, reading what was there without rearranging it. But living isn't betrayal, it's what they'd want us to do. Ethan bought the books and the novel Helen had recommended. At the register, she handed him a card. "If you're still here this afternoon, the shop does a reading hour for kids at 4. Sophie runs it. Liam might enjoy." 7 o'clock. The Seacliff restaurant occupied the edge of a cliff, the way a throne occupies the end of a hall with authority and a commanding view of everything below. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Atlantic at its most theatrical. Ethan had put on the blue button-down shirt. Liam had mentioned on the drive over that it was the color their mother liked. He had seen it in photographs. Frank was already seated at a corner table. He stood when they approached, and his handshake carried the warmth of someone genuinely pleased rather than professionally obligated. The conversation deepened gradually, finding its own level through the natural current of shared interest. "So," Frank said in the tone of someone who had been waiting to ask this particular question, "if you could build an infrastructure department from scratch, proper resources, full authority, what would it look like?" The question landed in the center of Ethan's chest like a key finding a lock. He started slowly thinking as he spoke, but the thinking turned to momentum, and the momentum turned to excitement. Redundancy at every level, not just technical human. Every critical system has at least 3 people who can maintain it. Nobody is a single point of failure. Documentation that lives inside the development process. Cross-training built into the rotation. Sustainable on-call schedules, real rotation, real rest, and dedicated time for technical debt. Why the technical debt piece? Because systems degrade. If you're always in reactive mode, you never get ahead. You accumulate debt until everything becomes brittle, and one small failure cascades into catastrophe. The goal isn't just stability. Ethan paused. The goal is anti-fragility. Systems that get stronger under stress because they're designed to adapt, not just endure. Liam, who had been working through a plate of fish and chips, looked up. That's like what you said about my homework routine. It has to work even when you're not there to remind me. Frank turned to the boy with genuine delight. That is exactly right. He turned back to Ethan. If your systems only work when you're there, they're not systems. They're dependencies. And dependencies aren't something to be proud of. They're design flaws wearing a compliment as a disguise. The sentence landed with the force of revelation, not because it was new, but because it named precisely and without mercy the trap Ethan had spent years calling a career. He had been the dependency. He had worn it as a badge, and the badge had been a chain. Frank leaned back. My daughter Megan is 32 now. Wonderful woman. We talk every week. But for the first 22 years of her life, I was a ghost. I built Skyforge from a garage in Raleigh, 80-hour weeks for 20 years. Told myself it was for her, for the family. And when I finally looked up from the keyboard, Megan was a grown woman who could barely stand to be in the same room with me. He paused, and in the pause, Ethan heard the echo of his own story displaced by 20 years. It took me 10 years to repair that relationship. 10 years of showing up, of being wrong, of learning that you cannot make up for lost time. You can only stop losing more of it. Nobody gives refunds on childhood. He looked at Liam, then back at Ethan. That's why I need leaders who can go home at 5:30 and trust that the work will still be there in the morning. I don't need martyrs. I need people who build things that don't require heroics to maintain. Frank did not offer Ethan a job. He did something more valuable. He opened a door without pushing anyone through it. Skyforge is looking for someone to lead infrastructure architecture. New department built from the ground up. I'd like you to come talk to my people next week by video. No promises from either side, but the conversation would be worth having. On the drive back, Liam clutched the wooden dolphin and stared out the window. Then in the voice of a boy presenting his findings for review, he smiles with his eyes. Mom used to say that's how you know if someone's really smiling. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Claire speaking through their son, reaching across the years in the impassable border between living and gone. Liam could not have known he was quoting a woman he did not remember repeating a piece of wisdom that Claire had shared during a life Liam had been part of for only 8 months. Your mom was right about that. She was right about a lot of things. Sunday came gently, the last full day unfolding, with the bittersweet awareness that time was running out on something that had just begun to feel like home. They ate breakfast at Captain Jack's for the third and final time. Dottie spotted their last day energy from across the room, delivered celebration pancakes with extra chocolate chips, and told them to come back next year or she would take it personally. Jay Barrett texted during breakfast, next salon audit, chintuk tat by. Compliance rating B ha, stock rot mui hyphen chum, board hopkun, tam hua. By mid-morning, they were on the beach for the last time, and Liam had declared this castle the masterpiece. They worked for 3 hours, and a small girl asked if she could help with the moat, and Liam accepted her assistance with a patient generosity that reminded Ethan of Claire. At 3 o'clock, the castle complete, and the tide beginning its advance, Ethan's phone rang. Philip Alderman. Again. The board is prepared to offer you a consulting contract. $200,000 for 3 months of work, remote your own hours. Train the team, document the undocumented systems, help us through remediation. $200,000. The number sat in the air like something physical. 200,000 would buy more than a year of safety, would render the legal pad calculation irrelevant, and he did not yet have an offer from Skyforge. He had an invitation to interview, a good conversation, a door opened but not yet walked through. He looked at Liam, who was sitting beside the finished castle reading one of the books from Helen's shop legs, crossed, completely absorbed. Hey bud, hypothetical question. Liam did not look up. What's hypothetical? Made up. If someone offered me a lot of money to go back and do something that made me unhappy, should I take it? The boy turned to Paige. Would you have to be on your phone all the time again? Probably. Then no. No elaborate reasoning, no philosophical framework, just the clear, irreducible assessment of a child who had one metric for measuring the quality of his life. Is my dad here, or is my dad holding a phone and pretending to be here? Ethan picked up the phone. Mr. Alderman, I appreciate the offer. The answer is no. Be reasonable. This is $200,000 for 3 months. It's not about the money. It's about what I'm teaching my son. He paused, and the next sentence arrived fully formed from a depth he had not known he contained. I spent 9 years making myself irreplaceable. Turns out that was just a cage with a nicer lock. Alderman, in a voice that held something that might have been grudging respect. Monica has been suspended. The board is looking for a buyer. Nexelon may not survive this quarter. I'm sorry to hear that, genuinely, but it's not mine to fix anymore. After hanging up, Ethan pocketed the phone and looked at the ocean. The tide had reached the outer wall of the castle. The first wave washed over it, and the carefully placed shells shifted and the sand softened. Liam watched without distress. It's going. Yeah, that's kind of sad. Or that's what makes it special. We built it knowing it wouldn't last. Built it anyway. The boy considered this, then with quiet certainty, like how Mom couldn't stay. But you're glad she was here anyway. The sentence hit Ethan in the center of his chest. His 9-year-old had just articulated in the simple language of sand and water the entire philosophy of love and loss that Ethan had spent years running from. Yeah, bud, exactly like that. That evening, they ate fish tacos at a place on the pier where string lights made everything look like a movie set. Liam had carnitas. Ethan had mahi-mahi. They ordered too much and talked about everything and nothing, and for the first time since Wednesday, Ethan did not think about Nexelon or Monica or the numbers on the legal pad. Liam slipped his hand into Ethan's as they walked back through the warm night air. Trust being rebuilt, grain by grain, the way sandcastles are built, not all at once, but deliberately carefully with the understanding that the process matters more than the product. Back at the cottage, Ethan checked his phone. 2 messages. Frank Hargrove. My team will reach out Monday. Come prepared to talk about what you want to build, not just what you fixed. Helen Marsh. Sophie says your Liam is the only kid who asked for book recommendations better than hers. Safe travels home. 2 doors. One professional, one personal. Neither promising anything. Both suggesting that the world contained more than the wreckage of what had been lost, that somewhere ahead past the fear and the uncertainty, there were things worth building. Things worth building even though they would not last forever. Things worth building anyway. Ethan powered off his phone and set it on the nightstand. Outside, the ocean did what it had always done. Inside, a boy slept, and a man sat in the dark with something that was not quite peace, but was closer to it than anything he had felt in a very long time. And tomorrow they would drive home, and the week after that, a new chapter would begin, or it would not. And either way, the choice had been made, and the choice was the right one, and that was enough. They stopped at a roadside gallery on Monday morning because Liam spotted it from the highway and asked, and Ethan was learning that the word yes had been underused in his vocabulary for a long time. The gallery was a converted fishing shack with paintings stacked against every wall, and a woman in her 70s presiding over the chaos with the serene authority of someone who had stopped caring about commerce and started caring about color. They both stopped in front of the same piece at the same time. A watercolor. Father and son walking along a shoreline at sunset, the figures rendered with just enough detail to be universal and just enough specificity to be personal. The man slightly ahead, the boy slightly behind their shadows, stretching across the sand in a single connected line. The gallery owner watched them studying it. Painted that last week. You two inspired it. Saw you walking past every day. Something about the way you looked at each other like you were exactly where you were supposed to be, but hadn't quite realized it yet. Ethan bought the painting. Liam held it on his lap for the entire 6-hour drive, protecting the glass with both hands as if it were an artifact from a civilization he had just discovered existed. The drive home unspooled through Piedmont and Pine. Liam read for the first 3 hours, then woke from an unannounced nap and spent the remaining 3 talking about the aquarium, about Earl's honey, about how Sophie Marsh had recommended a book series that sounded actually hard, not fake hard, and about Frank. Dad, do you think Frank Hargrove is like a grandpa? What do you mean? Like he talks to you the way Grandpa used to talk to Mom in the videos. Like he already knows the answer but wants you to figure it out yourself. Charlotte arrived in the late afternoon and the house looked different. Not physically the same suburban, colonial, same trimmed lawn. But Ethan saw it with altered eyes. The home office visible through the front window, with its multiple monitors and the desk lamp that had burned past midnight more times than he could count, looked less like a command center and more like a cell. He stood in the home office doorway and looked at the space that had consumed years of evenings while his son grew up in the next room. Then he sat down not to work but to write a resignation letter. 3 sentences addressed to HR professional in tone devoid of blame. Clean break. Then he opened a blank document and began writing something else. Ideas. Systems he wanted to build. The department he had described to Frank at Seacliff, the one that existed only in his imagination, and was for that reason more real than anything he had built at Nexelon, because imagination is where integrity lives before compromise gets its hands on it. He typed for 2 hours, the words coming with a fluency that surprised him as if a dam had broken. A knock on the doorframe. Liam, freshly showered, pajamas on. Dad, dinner. 8:30. The old reflex fired 5 more minutes. Let me finish this section. He closed the laptop instead. Grilled cheese, the fancy kind with the good bread. They made it together, sat at the kitchen table, not the home office desk, not the couch with a laptop on the armrest, and ate while Liam described his plan to build a terrarium for the classroom science project. The kitchen felt different. 2 people eating grilled cheese and talking about terrariums, and the simplicity of it was so radical, so fundamentally contrary to everything the previous years had been, that Ethan had to look away for a moment to keep his composure. Tuesday brought the first Skyforge interview. The VP of Engineering was a woman named Patricia Webb, mid-50s, direct in the way that people who have earned their authority through competence tend to be. The conversation lasted 90 minutes. She asked about failure, not the interview-safe version, but real failure. Systems he had built that had broken. Decisions he had made that were wrong. Ethan told the truth. About the database migration that had crashed during off hours. About the security protocol with an unanticipated vulnerability. About the years he had spent building infrastructure that was technically excellent and organizationally catastrophic, because a system that depends on one person is not a system at all, but a hostage situation with good uptime metrics. Thursday brought the second round. 2 senior engineers, both younger than Ethan, both sharp. A system design challenge, hypothetical company, rapid growth buckling infrastructure. Design the migration, account for risk. Ethan worked through it on a shared screen, and what emerged was not a textbook answer, but something built from years of midnight emergencies and the hard-won understanding that real engineering is not about elegance, but about durability. He did not have a degree from MIT. He had a community college education and 17 certifications earned on weeknights while his son slept 10 feet away, and the gap between what those credentials suggested and what his hands could actually do was the gap between a map and the territory itself. One of the engineers, a man named Will, leaned back when the exercise was over. That's how everyone should design migrations, but nobody does it because it requires admitting up front that things will break. Things always break. The question is whether you designed for the breaking or pretended it wouldn't happen. Friday brought the final round. Frank Hargrove. No technical questions, just one. Your best engineer wants to take vacation in the middle of a product launch. What do? I ask if he's trained a backup. If he has, I tell him to go. The system should survive his absence. If it can't, that's a failure of design, not the person who wants a vacation. If he hasn't trained a backup, we fix the design flaw together, then he goes. Why that answer? Because I was that engineer, and the system punished me for being human. Frank's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. One more question. What does work mean to you now? Not what did it mean. What does it mean today? Ethan let the question breathe. Work is what I do. It's not who I am. I confused those 2 things for almost a decade, and the confusion cost me my son's childhood and nearly cost me his trust. I want to build something at Skyforge that works when I'm not watching. Something that doesn't need a hero because heroes burn out and the systems they leave behind burn down. I want to go home at 5:30 and know the infrastructure is fine, not because I'm checking my phone under the dinner table, but because I built it to be fine without me. While Ethan was interviewing, Nexelon was dying. Jay Barrett called with updates that arrived in the flat, precise cadences of a battlefield correspondent reporting from a position that was no longer defensible. The SEC audit had failed not partially, not technically, but comprehensively in a manner that suggested the problems were structural, accumulated over years of deferred maintenance and organizational denial. Compliance rating downgraded. Stock dropped 12%, then another 8%, when a tech journalist published an analysis suggesting Nexelon's infrastructure had been built on institutional dependency. The board called an emergency meeting. Craig Dunlap was quietly reassigned to a role with no direct reports, corporate purgatory. Monica Vance resigned 3 weeks after Ethan's firing, technically voluntary in the sense that she chose to jump before the board pushed her. Jay's description was succinct. She walked out carrying one box and the expression of someone who had just realized the fire she started was the one that would burn her own house down. Nexelon was acquired 6 weeks later by tech venture Global 30 cents on the dollar. Most of the engineering team was laid off. The Charlotte office closed. Yampimu. And in the middle of all this destruction, one thing survived: Ethan's documentation. The security protocols he had written, the system architecture diagrams, the runbooks and disaster recovery plans that Craig had called garbage, and the SEC auditors had called the only thing preventing complete regulatory meltdown. The documentation outlived the company that had rejected the man who wrote it. A reporter from Tech Week magazine called asking for comment. No comment. I'm focused on what comes next. On a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after the Nexelon sale, Jay Barrett drove down from Charlotte and showed up at Ethan's door holding a six-pack and wearing the expression of a man who had recently survived a shipwreck and wanted to sit on dry land with someone who understood what the water had felt like. They sat on the back porch while Liam practiced skateboarding in the driveway, the sound of wheels on concrete providing a backdrop that was in its ordinariness a kind of music. Jay stared at his beer for a long time before speaking. I spent 6 years watching you hold that place together with duct tape and determination. And the day you left, I realized something. I was doing the same thing. Not at your level, but the same basic pattern. Showing up early, staying late, convincing myself that dedication and indispensability were the same thing. They're not. Yeah, I know that now. The week after they laid everyone off, I went home at 5 o'clock for the first time in years, and my wife looked at me like I was a stranger who'd walked into the wrong house. Took her about 3 days to stop waiting for me to disappear back into the office. How is she now? Better. We're better. She said something that stuck. She said she'd been married to my schedule for 6 years and was looking forward to being married to me instead. Liam wiped out on the skateboard, rolled twice across the driveway, and popped up with the resilient indifference that 9-year-olds bring to physical failure. Jay watched him and shook his head slowly. That kid, he called me once about a year ago from the school office. Said he forgot his lunch and didn't want to bother you because you were in meetings. Asked me if I could drop one off. Ethan set down his beer. He never told me that. I know. I brought him a sandwich and told him next time to call his dad. He said, and I remember this exactly, he said, Jay, my dad fixes important things. Lunch isn't important enough to interrupt. The silence that followed was the kind that reshapes rooms. Ethan looked at his son, who was now attempting a kick turn with the fearless incompetence of someone who had not yet learned that failure was supposed to be embarrassing. And he felt the full weight of every meal he had missed, every call he had not taken, every moment when his son had quietly solved his own problems, because the alternative, needing his father, had been trained out of him by years of unavailability. Jay, when Skyforge makes me an offer, and I think they will, I want you on my team. Jay looked at him. You serious? First hire if you want it. Let me talk to my wife. A pause. But yeah, I want it. They finished their beers in the comfortable silence of two men who had said what needed saying and could now simply sit with it, watching a boy on a skateboard learn, fall, and get back up. Which was, when you thought about it, a decent summary of the entire human experience. In Charlotte on a Wednesday evening, 6 weeks after her resignation, Monica Vance sat in her car in the parking lot of Zoe's high school. The engine was off. Her hands rested on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, the posture of someone who was not driving anywhere but needed something to hold on to. Through the windshield, she could see the auditorium entrance. Parents filing in, fathers in khakis, mothers in cardigans, couples holding hands, saving seats, performing the ordinary rituals of involvement that Monica had opted out of so many times that opting out had become her default setting. The play had started 40 minutes ago. She knew this because she had been sitting in the parking lot for 40 minutes arguing with herself. The argument was not complex. Go in or drive away. Two options, binary. The kind of decision that should have been effortless for a woman who had built a 3,000-person company through decisive action. But this was not a board meeting. There were no metrics here, no KP, no quarterly projections to hide behind. There was only a 16-year-old girl on a stage performing in a play that her mother had been invited to and had until this moment categorized as low priority. Monica opened the car door. The auditorium was warm and dim. She found a seat in the back row, folding herself into it with the careful movements of someone who did not want to be noticed. On stage, Zoe was mid-scene. Monica did not know the play, did not know the character, did not know any of the details that a present parent would have absorbed through weeks of rehearsal stories and costume discussions and the ambient information that flows naturally between a child and a parent who is paying attention. But she knew her daughter's voice. Even from the back row, even through the acoustics of a high school auditorium that had not been designed for nuance, she recognized the particular quality of Zoe's speaking voice, the slight breathiness, the way she landed hard on consonants, the rhythm that was Monica realized with a jolt her own rhythm. Zoe spoke the way Monica spoke. The daughter had inherited the mother's cadence, even without the mother's presence, the way certain traits transmit through blood rather than contact. Zoe was good, not transcendent, not destined for Broadway, but good in the way that mattered, committed, present, alive in the role. She occupied the stage with a confidence that Monica recognized because it was the same confidence Monica brought to boardrooms repurposed here for something that did not generate revenue, but clearly generated joy. The play ended. Applause. Zoe took her bow with a smile that reminded Monica painfully of the 12-year-old in the photograph, the one that had been face down on her desk for years. The cast came out to greet families. Monica stood in the back, uncertain for the first time in recent memory. Corporate acquisitions, SEC negotiations, hostile board meetings. None of them had produced the specific flavor of fear she felt now, which was the fear of being unwanted by someone she had no right to expect welcome from. Zoe spotted her. The girl's expression went through 3 phases in 2 seconds: surprise, confusion, and something that was not quite joy, but was in the same neighborhood, the cautious recognition that something unexpected had happened, and it might possibly be good. Monica walked forward. "You were wonderful up there." Zoe stared at her for a long 5 seconds. "You came." "I'm sorry I was late." "You came." Zoe's voice cracked on the second word, and in that crack, Monica heard the entire history of a daughter who had stopped expecting and had just been given, without warning, a reason to reconsider. "That's enough. You came." They did not hug, they were not there yet, but they stood facing each other in a high school auditorium while other families embraced around them, and the distance between them, which had been measured in years and missed events, in a photograph lying face down, contracted by a fraction. Small, almost imperceptible, but real. Monica drove home to the apartment she had rented after the resignation, smaller than her old office, which was both humiliating and, in a way, she was still learning to articulate appropriate. She sat at the kitchen table where she was teaching herself to eat dinner without a laptop open, and she wrote an email. 3 months after the firing, the email arrived in Ethan's personal inbox. "Ethan, I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I fired you because you dared to do what I've never been able to do: choose your child over your company. That wasn't a business decision. It was ego. I am learning slowly and badly to admit that. I went to Zoe's play last month. 40 minutes late. She was surprised I came at all. We are starting over. I wanted you to know that watching you choose Liam made me realize I still had the chance to choose Zoe, and I almost missed it. Monica." He read it twice. She did not excuse herself, did not invoke stress or the particular demands that women executives face, did not ask for absolution. She simply stated what had happened, named it accurately, and reported that she was attempting to change. He waited 2 days before responding. His reply was 4 sentences. "Monica, thank you for writing. I understand more than you might think. The fact that you showed up matters more than the 40 minutes. I hope you and Zoe find your way back." He pressed send and felt something release, not forgiveness exactly, but the moment when you stop carrying a stone you forgot you were holding, and your hand opens and it falls, and you did not realize how heavy it was until it was gone. In her apartment, Monica read his reply at a kitchen table that was becoming slowly something more than a surface for unopened mail. Behind her, propped against the backsplash, a framed photograph of Zoe smiled at the room. Face up. It had been face up for 3 weeks now, and every morning when Monica saw it, she felt a complicated mixture of grief for the years she had wasted and something fragile and improbable, pushing through the first evidence that the woman who had built an empire could build something much smaller and much more important. The call from Frank came on a Friday, not through HR, not through a recruiter from Frank's own phone, which Ethan understood as a gesture of respect. Director of Infrastructure Architecture, 210,000 base performance bonus, equity vesting over 4 years. Remote with quarterly team gatherings. And one non-negotiable, you take your vacation days. All of them. Every year. If I find out you're skipping PTO, we're going to have a conversation you won't enjoy. Ethan laughed, and it surprised him with its depth. Minimum 4 weeks PTO per year. Mandatory, not optional. If you can't unplug it, means you haven't built what I'm asking you to build. Yes. The word came out without deliberation. Just yes. Simple, clean, complete. He was standing in the kitchen. Liam was at the table doing homework math problems spread across the surface. The boy had heard enough the particular frequency of his father's voice when something important was happening, and he was watching now with the careful, measured look that Ethan had come to recognize as Liam's way of bracing for information. I got it, bud. The new job. The new job. Liam stood up from his table, crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, and wrapped his arms around Ethan's midsection with a force that seemed disproportionate to his size, his face pressed into his father's stomach because he was not yet tall enough to reach his shoulders, and he held on with the grip of someone who has been waiting for solid ground and has finally found it. No words, no celebration, just a boy holding his father in a kitchen that smelled of the spaghetti they had made for dinner, and a man resting his hand on his son's head and feeling the life that was growing there, the life he had almost missed entirely. 6 months passed, and each one laid down new evidence that the decision on the beach had been the right one. At Skyforge, Ethan built his department from the ground up. Jay Barrett was his first hire. 3 engineers per critical system, documentation integrated into the workflow, cross-training rotation, sustainable on-call. The test came at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. Critical system alert. Ethan read the notification and set the phone back down. Sarah Porter, whom Jay had hired, whom Ethan had trained, handled the incident. By morning, the resolution was documented, the root cause identified, a preventive measure implemented. Ethan read the incident report over coffee, smiled. This was the legacy he wanted. Not the heroic midnight save, but the unremarkable 2 a.m. resolution that no one would remember because it worked exactly as designed. Frank sent a message that afternoon, systems ran fine while you slept. That's the whole point. Hard stop at 5:30 became non-negotiable. Laptop closed, phone on silent. The first time Ethan declined a meeting because it conflicted with picking Liam up from school, Frank's response arrived within minutes. Good. That's exactly the culture we're building. Career day arrived on a Thursday in October, and Ethan was there. Not on a video call from the parking lot, not rushing in 15 minutes late, there in the classroom, sitting in a chair designed for someone a third his size. Liam introduced him. This is my dad. He builds computer systems that don't break when people go on vacation. The classroom laughed. Mrs. Calloway laughed. Ethan laughed, and the laughter felt like medicine. Walking to the car afterward, Liam was quiet. Then thanks for coming. Told you I would. Yeah, but this time I believed you. The distinction was his scalpel. This time I believed you, meaning all the other times the promise had been received, but not trusted. The distance between things Dad says and things that happen was years wide, and crossing it had required nothing more and nothing less than showing up. Mrs. Calloway stopped Ethan at drop-off later that week. Liam told me you're different now, that you actually listen when he talks. 6 words from a 9-year-old relayed through his teacher, and they were the most significant performance review Ethan had ever received. Helen existed at the periphery of these months, the way a melody exists at the periphery of a conversation present, contributing to the atmosphere, occasionally stepping forward. They talked on the phone every week, about books at first because books were safe territory, then about their children, then about themselves, grief and rebuilding, and the specific loneliness of a bed built for 2. Ethan drove to Outer Banks for a weekend in March. Helen met them at the bookstore, which had survived the winter barely. She had started selling online listing inventory on 3 platforms. The revenue was not transformative, but sufficient, and the sufficiency had been earned entirely by her own effort, which mattered to Helen the way structural integrity matters to an engineer. Ethan helped her fix a bookshelf that had finally surrendered to gravity. Helen watched him work. You fix shelves like you talk about servers. Patient, like the wood deserves to be listened to. I didn't know I could fix things with my hands until recently. Maybe you just needed to remember that fixing things is fixing things regardless of the material. The afternoon they walked on the beach, the same stretch of sand where a castle had been built and a career had ended. Ethan reached for Helen's hand. The gesture was not planned. It was the natural movement of a man who had been walking beside a woman for 3 hours and realized that the distance between their hands was the only distance left to close. Helen's fingers closed around his, warm, steady, the grip of a woman who had decided that accepting company was not the same as admitting weakness. My husband would have liked you, Helen said eventually. He had a thing for people who are quietly stubborn. Claire would have liked you too. She had a thing for people who know exactly how full of it the world is and choose to be kind anyway. When Ethan offered to help with the bookstore's finances, Helen declined with firmness. If the shop survives, it survives on what I build. If it doesn't, I'll know the truth instead of wondering whether someone else's money was keeping a failure alive. That's not pride. That's information I need. 1 year after the phone call on the beach, they went back. The cottage was the same. Creaking floors, mismatched furniture, the porthole window. But 4 people walked through the door instead of 2. Ethan and Liam, Helen and Sophie. 2 families becoming, gradually and without announcement, something that might eventually require a single name. Captain Jax had not changed. Dottie took one look at the expanded group and grinned. Bigger crew this year. Liam and Sophie exchanged the specific eye roll that preteens deploy when adults are being embarrassing, and the eye roll was itself a form of intimacy, the shared exasperation of 2 young people who have accepted each other's parents as a package deal. Frank Hargrove was in town as well. They had dinner at Seacliff, the same restaurant, the same corner table, but the conversation was different. Not business, friendship built on shared meals and mutual respect. Frank looked across the table at the 4 of them, and his expression carried the satisfaction of a man watching a seed bear fruit he would not have predicted. You know, when I told you to build systems that work without you, I wasn't only talking about servers. Ethan smiled. I thought you were talking about servers. Servers crash, you rebuild them. A family loss, that's a different kind of system failure. One that doesn't come with a restore button. That last evening, they built sandcastles. Liam led the design. 10 years old now, taller, his face beginning the slow transition from childhood roundness to the angular structure that would eventually become a young man. Sophie added shell mosaics and seaweed flags. Ethan and Helen sat nearby, close enough to help, if asked far enough to let the children work. Liam spoke to Sophie. Tide's gonna take it by morning. So why build it? Because my dad says that's how love works. You know it won't last forever. You build anyway. The words traveled across the sand and hit Ethan in a place that was no longer a wound, but a window. A place where grief and gratitude had fused into something that did not have a name in English, but that every language has tried to describe the feeling of holding joy and sorrow in the same hand and discovering that the hand is large enough for both. Later in the cottage, Liam found his father in the living room. The boy had that look, the one that meant he had been carrying something and had decided to set it down. Dad, I found something last year in your desk drawer at home. Letters from Mom. Ethan knew immediately. They're yours. She wrote them for you. She said she hoped you'd stop hiding and work before I grew up. That you were a great dad when you weren't scared. Your mom was right. Are you still scared? Different scared now? Scared of missing you growing up. Scared of not being here for the parts that matter. Liam looked at his father with those brown eyes. Claire's eyes, the ones that had watched Ethan with careful patience for 10 years, that had learned to read his stress in the set of his jaw and his love in the moments he chose to close the laptop, and said the truest thing either of them had spoken all week. You're here now, that counts. Ethan opened his arms and Liam folded into them. They held each other in the way that fathers and sons hold each other when the pretense of invulnerability has been set aside, and what remains is simply 2 people who love each other and have learned through loss and distance, and the long road back, that saying so is not weakness, but the most durable form of strength. Can we read one together, the one for my 10th birthday? It's coming up. Yeah, bud, I'd like that. Can Helen be there and Sophie? The question was small and enormous. A boy inviting new people into the most private space in his life, the space where his mother's words lived. Not replacing Claire, expanding the circle of people who would know her through the love she had left behind. If you want them there, absolutely. I want them there. Helen stood in the doorway. She had heard because the cottage was small, and some moments are too large for the rooms that contain them. Her eyes were wet, and the wetness was not sadness, but the particular overwhelm that comes from being invited into someone's sacred space and understanding what the invitation costs. She did not speak. She simply stood there, and her presence said everything that she understood, that she would carry it carefully, that she had her own letters, her own ghosts, her own collection of love preserved in forms that outlast the bodies that created them. The next morning, the beach, the same stretch of sand where everything had started, sunrise light turning the world gold. Ethan stood barefoot at the water's edge. His phone was in his pocket, silent, irrelevant. A text from Frank had arrived earlier. Enjoy your vacation. The systems are fine. That's the point. The systems were fine. That was the point. The whole point. Liam ran ahead with Sophie chasing waves, their laughter mixing with the ocean in a harmony that sounded like the future announcing itself. Helen stood beside Ethan. Her hand found his. Liam turned back, sand on his knees, grinning with the full unreserved grin that Ethan had spent a year earning the right to see. Dad, you know what the best part is? What, bud? This isn't special anymore. This is just life now. This is just how it is. Not special. Just life. The highest compliment a child can pay a parent, the acknowledgement that the extraordinary has become ordinary, that the exception has become the rule, an expectation in the grammar of a 10-year-old's heart is the deepest form of trust. Ethan Cole had been fired for choosing his son over his job. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything. Instead, it was the beginning of everything that actually counted. He had spent years building systems for other people, elegant, resilient, built to last. And in the end, the only system that mattered was the one he had almost forgotten to build a family. The one architecture that no audit could evaluate and no text message could destroy. The one thing that did not need a backup plan because it was the backup plan. He watched his son run along the shoreline with a girl who might someday become his sister. He felt the hand of a woman who might someday become his wife. He carried in his pocket a phone that contained somewhere in its memory the 3-line text that had demolished his career and delivered his life. And behind him in a cottage with creaking floors, a stack of letters waited, written by a woman who had known him better than he knew himself, who had seen the fear and the hiding, and who had trusted with the specific faith of someone who writes letters to a future she will not live to see that he would eventually find his way back. The tide came in. The castle from last night was gone. There would be time to build another. There would always be time.